Hello, welcome to Petra Media, and today we are going to discuss the pros and cons of the MPC 5000 and if it's something you should consider in 2024. Like, should you buy one of these in 2024? Let's discuss. Now, the MPC 5000 was I guess you could say, the black sheep of the MPC family. It was the one that came after the 2500. It had a lot of great features that came with it, but in the first version of the OS, it had a ton of issues. And we all know the story of all the people who talked bad about it. So, the entire community essentially was just like, oh man, it's not worth it. If he don't like it, or if they don't like it, it's not worth it. Akai addressed the issues and made a version 2 OS, but I think at that time the damage was done. And to be honest with you, I think the original plan to call it the 3500 was a good plan, mainly because the 5000 was never meant to be the competitor to the bigger machine or what was considered the bigger machine, the 4000. The 4000 was the pinnacle of the production environment for sampling at the time, meaning it had a ton of features that were just flat out amazing for its time. But it wasn't, how do I put this? It's not infallible. None of them were, because reality is the technology got better. I mean, the 4000, what made it amazing was, like I said before, the Z sampler and the Z sampler architecture. That architecture was something that you found in the rack sample versions of these machines. And the rack samples were just phenomenal, but they were hard to work with. You had to really work at getting what you want out of those machines. Now, with the advent of the 1000 and then the 2500 and then the 500 and eventually the 5000, which she really should have just been called the 3500, Akai went in a different direction. InMusic bought the company, or at least that end of the company, the professional end of it, and took it in a different direction. They started to go down the process of making them more streamlined. So now you didn't have a specialized machine, the 4000, or that had all the bells and whistles, or a specialized machine that was professional enough, but not as powerful as the 4000, the 2000 XL. And you kind of had two camps of producers. You either had those that were 2000 XL people who just made amazing music with the 2000 XL, or you had 4,000 people who just really, really dove in and got more out of the machines. And again, if you were like a little techie, the 4,000 was definitely for you. I guess if you're talking about software comparisons, the 2000 XL would be like Logic, and the 4000 would be like Ableton. I mean, that's really the best possible comparison I can make to today in that circumstance. The 1000 and the 2500 and eventually the 5000, 3500 really were kind of the middle of the road guys. So I guess in that comparison, it would be kind of like Studio One, or I don't know. There's a couple of DAWs that I think it could be like, but it wasn't what those machines were. It was a different direction. It also started the path of making it where all the machines worked together. And I think that was what InMusic was going for. It was like, hey, instead of us making 400 different architectures, let's just make one and expand upon it depending on the model. And this made that unit a flagship for those 4 machines. Only those 4 machines. It was never meant to compete with the 4000. And I think that's their fault. They should have never named it the 5000. They should have named it the 3500. I think everybody would have understood that. But at the time, everyone was starving for a successor to the 4000. And I don't think that this was like initially the plan. Like, yes, it's going to be a flagship, but no, it's not really going to replace the 4000. So this is my MPC 5000. It is newly cleaned, freshened up. I'm sure you guys saw the videos where I made some adjustments to this machine and took it apart, and we found a lot of nasty stuff inside of it. When I first got it, I cosmetically cleaned the surface of it. But when I saw what was really going on after I took it apart, I had to do a deep clean. But suffice to say, everything is running great on it now. I have changed the pads back to the original stock pads, which I think is the right decision for this machine. What I get with this machine, from my perspective, is the use of a unit that behaves well with the 1000. Now, the reason why that's important for me is because the 1000 is generally where I start everything. It's literally my favorite machine to work with, mainly because I tend to take it everywhere with me. The 5000 pretty much stays put in the studio, and the 5000 is a pretty good workhorse as a machine that lives connected to everything. One a really cool thing about the 5000 is the 5000 works really well with the 1000 files. The 5000, 1000, and 2500, if you've noticed, if you've really looked at the MPC2 software, you'll notice that there's an option to share files between this series of machines and the MPC2 software, meaning the vast majority of the features in these machines work with that software. And take note, that's one of the main reasons I chose this. I am a 2000 XL person. I love the 2000 XL. These machines work very much like the 2000 XL. This one obviously has way more features than the 2000 XL, just like the 1000, but it's one of the things that makes this a great thing for me to have. That being said, the 5000, when I use it in conjunction with the 1000, it allows me to add things to it. So I'm going to start with all the good things. The cool thing about this thing is the amount of storage it has built in already. So on the internal ROM, which I'm not sure if you can see the screen because the screen's kind of hard to see at this angle. I might have to take the camera down and actually hold it. So let's start in the hard drives. So for mine, I have several options of where to store data. You have the ROM, which is the internal memory, which is not a lot of space, but it's enough space to load a lot of different things. And Akai has added so much stuff. Even as I'm now realizing this is already here and I didn't realize it, the MPC 5000 comes with an option to load a grand piano already inside of it. It does have a synth in it, but Akai added an additional piano with it. All of this stuff here is all the kits that came with the machine. You know, it's a pretty sizable amount of stuff. It even has a string series in here as well. So the piano is loaded, and in order to access it, you change the program to grand piano. Now, the notes are out of sequence because Akai doesn't do things in order on the pads. Like, it's not in order. It's actually beneficial to connect a MIDI controller because then you can fully access the piano. But if I wanted to, I can also go back to the disk and load the strings as well. So if I go down to the MPC 5000 strings, tell it do it, and it's loading it to all the banks. Now, once it's done, go back to the main screen. As you can see here, I have grand piano, but I can also switch to MPC strings. And to be honest with you, that's enough to get a lot done with that, plus the drums, and of course the synth playing the bass line. So this is like a little bit more of a deeper dive into the way it works. When it comes to the piano and string feature, I didn't know this existed because when I first got this machine, it was, again, set up incorrectly, and I had to wipe the hard drive, the internal memory, I should say, and reload the OS version 2. And ever since I've done that, it's been behaving a lot better. So I have access to all these different things, all these different kits. I have a bunch of synth programs. It's got now, because I didn't have this before when I had it, before I cleaned it, I have arpeggiators. There's a bunch of those. Bass keys, regular keys, leads, pads, polysynths, effects, synth brass templates for various other things, and then some tuning perks. All of those things, so tuned percussions essentially, all of those things are now added on here, and they all work. I don't have to necessarily play them, but they do work. Compact flash is your standard 2 gigabyte compact flash drive, and I have a bunch of stuff on here. I'm just gonna load a session, and this is something I started on the 1000, and I'm just gonna load it here. With this machine, in order to load the file, I just have to do it on the ALL file, and then I go down to the project file. I could use program, but I wanna make sure all the parameters are loaded from whatever I was doing on the other machine onto this machine. And the speed is decent. It's not crazy fast, it's not slow, but everything's loaded. Let me just make sure all the tracks are playing. I don't want to turn it up too much because the kids are asleep and it's kind of late. So this was a sequence that I started on the 1000, and then I came over here to the 5000 and started working on it. So now we go to the hard drive, and on my hard drive, I have a terabyte of space. And I've broken things down in a couple of different ways, but suffice to say, I have access to that. The CD drive is actually interesting. I'm not using the CD drive. So I took the CD out because if I leave the CD in, it actually takes forever for this machine to load because it's trying to scan the CD to make sure there's nothing it needs on there. So I tend to skip that. To record samples, I have a lot of space. This thing has a memory expansion. I have 192 megabytes of space, which it doesn't tell you how much sample time it has here. And there's a pro and con to this because I can literally set it really, really high. What I've been doing is setting mine at about 1 minute, 10 seconds. I don't ever sample that long, but usually I generally sample anywhere from a few seconds to like 30 seconds max. But I set it high so that I don't have to think about the threshold. And because I have the thing connected analog-wise, I just leave it on analog for the recording settings. Sampling function is pretty clean and very straightforward. And it's great for a place to start a project. So when I'm working on things in here, I tend to start with the samples, chop them up, and play with it here, and then I move on from there. That is the beginning of the first con, and probably my only real con with this machine, because the other issue that I talked about in the video, I think I figured out what caused that. But let's say I wanted to chop this up, right? I have a sample, and I tell it to chop, and it says, do you want to do it equally or auto? I have not found a comfortable way to do the auto chop on here, so I don't use the auto chop. I just use equal. So let's say I wanted to do, I'm just gonna use simple numbers, use four equal pieces, right? I'm gonna tell it to do it. So now it's created 4 equal loops, right? So that's 1, go to group 2, and I tell it to play it. And then group 3, and then group 4. Now, I have all of this set up, right? Let's say I wanna take the sample out. This is my only beef with the chops. If I hit edit and I tell it to extract region 1, right? Done. Now I go to region 2 and I say extract region 2. Done. It immediately goes back to region 1. So now I have to go to region 3 and I say do it, extracts, goes back to region 1. Do you see how that's annoying? If I hit do it again in 4, goes back to region 1. So now I have all 4 of them cut, which is great, but it keeps going back to region 1. So what happens when you have a long sample and you have 16 pieces? You have to just mentally remind yourself where you are in the sample for extracting things, and that can be annoying. The other problem I have with this was I missed how when I spun the jog wheel on the 2000 XL, it can go faster and slower. The 1000 kind of behaves the same way. Remember I said the 1000 and 2000 XL kind of have a lot of similar behaviors. This does too, but again, this is one thing that's annoying. In order for me to go faster through the sample, I have to hit shift and then press left to move over. And normally I'm in the hundreds or the thousands. In the hundreds, it goes pretty quick. If I go into the thousands, it goes a lot quicker. But that's the only way to really get it to go fast, which is really kind of one of those things that once you get used to it, it's easy. But in the meantime, it's frustrating. And if I want to zoom in on a sample, I just have to open the window button on the chop. I can zoom out on the chop. This was something someone was complaining about that they didn't seem to understand fully. And again, if you hit shift and you move it over, you can go faster or slower through the chop. And then you close it and then you've locked it in. It's basically this. You use the region area to find where you're trying to go and move the sample around to. And then you go and hit window and zoom in to get it a little bit closer until you find the fine point. Oh, you know what? This is exactly where I want to chop it. Boom, right? Yeah, that looks right. And then you close it and then you're locked in on your sample. It's not hard, it's just extra steps. And you do this on the new MPC software easier because it's touchscreen. It's annoying on the studio too because I don't have a touchscreen. If I wanted to do that, I'd have to have a touchscreen computer and then it would be a little bit easier. So that's my only real true grievance with this. Now, let's go to the programs. Now in programs, I only have one program right now. So in programs, if I go to the samples, it's already got everything chopped up the way I wanted it. I think I have other samples. Do I have other samples on here? There we go. So go to the next one. There's nothing here. Okay, there's nothing on D. So we'll work with D. Now, this is a pro. So let's say we wanted to take out those samples, right? I go all the way back over here. I go to the samples. This was the first one, right? Bounce, drums, loop 1, right? I'm gonna put that on the first pad, right? So I'm gonna go to here. Here we go. So now it's on pad 13, right? Now, if I go to the next pad, I go to pad 14 and I turn the jog wheel once, it automatically puts the third one, which is the next one, right next to it. If I go to the next pad and I go to pad 15, it puts the next one. If I go to the next pad, it puts the next one. That almost makes up for the BS that's going on in the sample trim section. It's almost like you did all this hard work, let me make this a little bit easier for you. That is awesome. I also love the fact that I can literally tune the whole program one time and pitch things up and down, which is great, but you have to create a separate program. That was not really hard, but just something that I had to realize. But once I did that, it was great. The good thing about that is once you say, you know what, I'm gonna make these samples mono, I'm gonna make this mono, make that one mono, I'm gonna make that one mono. So now all of them are set. And then let's say I go to mute group 3, just because I don't know in this sequence how I have it set up. And I'm sure you guys recognize that sample. So now it's set, right? So let's say I want to change this. I'm going to go and pitch it. So I'm going to pick one of them to play. Let's just play that one. So it automatically pitches all of them for you in one shot. And you can pitch all of them up and then still go in and say, you know what? I want that one to be different. So that gives you 2 levels of tuning in one program. And I kind of like that. I did recently find this in the 1000. It took some digging to figure out how to do it, but it does exist in the 1000. Now, going back to the drums. Okay, right. I remember I told you I had it all on one program. I need to change that back to 0. So the drums, remember how I said that this was kind of a precursor to the MPC2 software? And some people will agree with me, some people won't. Let's say I decided to add 3. That's a snare, right? And then I'm going to go down to 4. I forgot what that was. It's an 808. You know what? Let's do that. That way you can hear the difference. And then I'm going to go to, let's say, So now you have a hat, a percussive sound, a snare, and a kick. Now, let's go into the window for this. And this was actually the first machine that had cycling of the sample. So what does that mean? I can either play the sample all together, all of them together as one shots, or I could tell it to cycle through the sample, but then on full level so you can hear it. So it's literally cycling through all of the different samples, or I can set it to random. So random, it's just gonna do whatever. This is great for when you're working with hi-hats, or if you want to layer a bunch of different snares together, or any of those type of things. But that is such a cool feature that a lot of people don't know about. This feature doesn't exist in the MPC 1000 as far as I know, unless it's in JJOS. It might be in JJOS. But suffice to say, great tool, great little feature, and I like using it. I'm gonna take it out for this session. Those are the main pros that are going to be helpful with this machine when it comes to using it just primarily. Now, the thing that I had a problem with that was another con, like I said, I had a couple. I gave you the first one with the sampling. The second one was dealing with the programming. And I think it had to do with something I did that was a mistake. The window for programming gets weird when you start fiddling around with it. And I made the mistake of fiddling around with it. So you have your program 1. This is program 1. Program 2 is not loaded because there's nothing here. But if I wanted another program, I could hit the synth, and then that gives you program 2. So now if I go back to the main screen, you have the synth, which, you can change the different patches. You have to actually go to the disk. I don't know if there's another way to do this. Someone else can tell me if they know. But you have to go to the disk, go to the ROM, go to the synth. You have to know what you're looking for, go into it, and then you say, do it. All of a sudden, now it's loaded. Oh, you know what? Let me load another one. Do it. I could probably load all of them. I haven't tried this. Let's just try it. Just tell it to do it and load all of them. So all of the classic leads are now supposedly loaded. So now, if I go to Programs, and I go to Window, let me close. And I go here, now all of the leads, the classic leads are loaded. So let's say I select the ode. Or if I pick the mini lead, or if I pick the P5. All of those are now loaded onto the sequence. Now, the cool thing about this is you can access them easily by just picking the program. So that track could be that. This track could be the next one. All of these things are just there because I went ahead and preloaded all of them into here. And you can load more. I just didn't want to do that. You know what? For giggles, let's do that. We're going to go to disk. We're going to go back out. We're going to back out and see VA synth. I'm just going to tell it do it. And God knows what happens. Let's just see what happens. I don't know if it actually did anything because it was probably like, no, I'm not doing all of that. Let's see. Nope. Okay. So I have to actually tell it to do each of them individually. So let's go there and let's go to, we had the leads. We already loaded the classics. I'm going to tell it to load the moderns. Okay, now I'm going to tell it to load the polysynths. I'm going to say do it for the animated, do it. And let's go to big, do it. And let's just pick another one in here. The arpeggios, we're going to say all of the arpeggios. Do it. Done. So now on the main screen, what happens is you should have all of them. Let's go to the window. Let's go to programs. Yeah, there we go. So now you have a whole list of things. I could not do this before I'd fixed it. So yeah, I have access to all of these now. Now, the good thing about this is cool to play with. The bad thing is if I wanted to transfer this session to the MPC2 software using the compact flash drive, it will transfer everything but the synth. The synth I have to record out. I don't know if I can do it any other way, but as far as I know, you can't get the synth out of here unless you record it out analog. Now, that's fine because I have mine plugged up with all 8 and routed into the ADAT directly for now, just because I'm in the middle of a bunch of projects and I don't need to slow down in the middle of a bunch of projects to fiddle around with things. So right now, this is how I'm using it. And I can track those things in when I want to do it. I've also been using it for kit building. And in the kit building process, I dump things directly into Logic and then I process things in Logic. It's just faster because I know Logic like the back of my hand. It just makes the most sense to me. Okay, so that's the synth. The synth, like I said, is pretty cool. The arpeggiator is actually pretty cool as well. If I'm correct, I have to turn it on. That's right, there we go. And I can go through the menu settings for it. I can tell how many octaves. I can gate it. And it has a swing to it. So the arpeggiator is pretty cool. For the synth itself, if you want to change the settings on the synth, these become your controls for that. Again, let's try that again with the arpeggiator. And mind you, it's based on each section. So that's just the basic. And if I go into the VCOs, and it just keeps going on and on and on. And I haven't even touched the faders. And in the LFO section, there's 3 faders. The VCA, there's 4 for the envelopes. And the VCF is also 4 for the envelopes. The VCO, there's another 4 there. And then there's the basics with the 4 with the attack, sustain, decay, and release. So very powerful. Very, 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 very powerful. That's probably a third of what makes this machine truly worth it. It's just the thing that no one dives into because they don't understand it because it's not explained properly. This, you got to remember, this comes from an era when companies would make something and not properly explain how it works. And you just have to do some menu diving and figure it out. And I decided to do that. That's the synthesizer and arpeggiator. Like I said, you get 3 VCOs, a VCF, an envelope, 2 envelopes, a VCA, a VC. It's crazy. Like, there's so much more going on here, and a lot of people don't know about that. And think about it. That means I have a piano, a string section, a bunch of patches that I need to count how many that I have for the synthesizer section. And then there's just whatever you add as the drum machine. That makes this insanely powerful. Then you have your selector for your mic and line input. So either you have a mic input or you can decide for it to be a phono input. So you can hook up a turntable directly and it lowers the signal expectation for the input so that it can actually handle the lower frequency, and it just boosts it up so you can record it, because turntables don't have high outputs. If you go into the input section, you have some options. Again, I'm not sure if the camera is picking up the screen, but it gives you an option of inputs in and through, analog or digital. I can decide if I want it to be stereo mono or mono left, mono right, how high it is, and I can actually record using the effects bus. So I can actually set the effects on here. That's something we need to dive into real quick. So we're back on the handheld, and the effects section, actually if I go to mode and I go to effects, it's one of those things that's not fully understood by a lot of people. The effects section was interesting. I actually made some mistakes when I first got it myself, and I was kind of frustrated with it because I was like, why is this set up this way? Let me see if I just fixed it so you can see it a little bit better. That should be better. So the effects section, you have 4 effects buses. You have effects 1 and 2 on the first tab. On the second tab, you have effects 3 and 4. And then you have the master EQ, which is usually off, the master compressor that's usually off. Your various bypasses, whether it's on and off, you just turn it on and off. Then you go to the mixer. Right now we're in the synthesizer. So it's just trying to figure out what's going on. Let's go back to the track mixer. You have, all the different settings for the track mixer. Right now, program mixer is telling it because of what I was doing earlier. So let's go back to that. You have your setup, you have your various inputs. Let's go back to the effects real quick. And before we do this, let me just fix this so we can actually see what's going on. We're gonna go back to all the way, because we have all these synths now. Let's go all the way back to just the drums. So we're back on program 1. There we go. Just pads. Okay, so we're back on program 1. Program mixer, track mixer, and let's go back to effects. Now the effects is pretty cool because what you get in the effects section is, like I said, 4 buses. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4. But on each bus, you can put 2 different effects. So if I go here and I go through the list, you have the flangers, the chorus, the auto pans, and they have sync options. So you have a flanger and a flanger sync. In the 1000, I don't get this. I only get the flanger. In this, you have a flanger sync. You have an auto pan sync. Almost everything is set up that way. Multiple phasers, high pass, low pass filters. You can sync those. You have shelving filters, various delays, and you have various versions of it where you have analog, tape sync, ping pong, multi-tap. You have distortion. You have compressors. The compressors, you get opto, VCA, a vintage, and a master. Reverb, and then you have a decimator, and a resampler, and frequency shifter. That's a lot going on in here just for effects. So let's say I selected a flanger and I close this. After fiddling with the effects window and setting up the way I want it to be. Then I go over here and I say, I want a different thing for this. I'm gonna add a auto pan. Select that. So now you have the auto pan swinging back and forth based on quarter notes or higher. And you can change this using the knobs, because remember I was telling you one of the things that makes the bigger machines great is that you can literally just affect things directly from the knobs instead of going and diving on the data wheel. Or you just use the data wheel and select it, right? So now that one is set how I want it to be. And then I can decide if it's left, right, quarter, or I could send it to different outputs, which is great. And then you go to the next one and you do the same thing on 1 and 2 and set whatever you want, compressor, whatever, EQ. You go to 3 and 4, do the same thing. That doesn't give you 2 effects, that gives you 8 effects. You have 4 effects buses and 2 per, so you have 8 effects that you can set on there. And that's before you even get to the master outs and all that other stuff. So, and then you go to the mix, you go to the program, and you select, effects 1, 2, 3, or 4, and then it just applies it, and then you decide how much is fed to it, whether you send all of it, some of it, however you want to do it. Right now, I think I have a partial for most of mine for various things. That is super powerful when it comes to the way that works. The step edit is not my favorite thing. I honestly don't go into the screen pretty much ever because I don't have a reason to go in here. I just don't have a reason to go in here. The grid edit is actually pretty cool. The grid edit's been very helpful for fixing things with samples that are sounding off, but honestly, I rarely use it. The best way to use this, I think, is when you're laying drum tracks and you want to just lay the drum tracks first, then you just tap, 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 and it just lays it down when you hit record. Like if I hit record, it immediately starts recording these things to the track one time. And I can set it to record as we go. I don't use this again. It's not a feature that I have a reason to use, but it's there. The song mode is just like any other song mode in the MPCs. Very straightforward. You set it based on sequence and how many times. So I could set sequence 1, add sequence 2, tell it how many times to repeat it for how many bars, yada, yada, yada. Press play, it just starts playing it. That's very straightforward. The recorder is interesting because I haven't used it yet, but this thing can record 8 tracks of audio based on your hard drive space. And because I have a terabyte, that's a lot of space. And then you can burn that to a CD if you wanted to at some point. If we go into the other features, the other features actually just basically decides how the system behaves, sets the internal clock, sustain pedal durations, etc. I don't have a reason to mess with this. I just leave it alone. The arpeggiator I can access from the pads or from the actual button over there in the corner. The sequence edit, this is a little bit more tricky because again, these are extra features that I just don't really use. I don't have a reason to use them, but it allows you to do some more editing based on events in the sequencing edit. The mixer we've already seen, MIDI sync. Again, features I'm not really messing with unless I have a general reason. Like I'm really just going in here to test if something is wrong. So I never really go in here. Even with the 1000, I don't really go into that screen ever. With the Q links, I can decide how the Q links behave. With pad 1 has an option for Q links. And then that kind of like surmises all of the features in here. Now, something that I've dove into more with this machine than I have with the other machine is the use of the way the banks work. Now, the pad banks, you have A, B, C, and D. You have 4 banks. It was an issue that was kind of weird since I've reinstalled the software, and it seemed to act funky where if I had all the drums loaded on one track and I go to another track, you know what? Let's just see if we can recreate it from scratch. So I'm going to restart the machine. Hold on a second. Okay, so the machine has been restarted. So I'm going to go to the disk, and we're going to go to Compact Flash, and I'm going to go to Alien Drum Kit. So I'm going to load that on pad 1. Then I'm going to go to the next one and load that on pad 2. And then I'm going to load the next one on the next pad. Boom. So now we have some really, really hard sounding drums, right? So we're gonna go back to the main screen and I'm gonna just record something, right? Doesn't matter what it is, right? Okay, so that's been recorded on track 1. So if I go to track 2, see, now it's working. It is a really strange thing that happened. I think it was a setting problem that I had with that one setting, with that one session. Let's try to record. So then I'm going to go to track 3. Okay, so that problem now doesn't exist. But what I did to solve it in the interim was go to programs, and then I would tell it that I wanted to add a program. So I go to Window, create a new program, and do it. Now, this was beneficial because of scenarios where I would need to use like a whole bunch of samples. So let's say I had all these pads loaded. Now remember, originally on this, and this, I had those drums. If I go back up here and I go to pad 1, I go to program 1, those drums exist. The Alien Kit is here, right? But if I go to program 2, all of a sudden they're not there. This effectively allows me to have anywhere from the 4 pad banks, which is 64 banks, or as many programs as the machine can handle. And that means I now have 64 times as many programs as the machine can handle in here. My biggest session on this machine I did a few days ago, and the CPU load on the machine was like negligible. I don't remember where I see that, but it was like something like 6% max that was being used. And I had a ton of crap on this machine running at the time. So it was fine. So for the most part, the machine has no major issues. I've had a few little glitches here and there, but again, older machine, not a huge deal. I'm totally fine with it. The only other issue that I have with mine specifically is this button doesn't work. But again, I don't need it. No matter how much I tried to clean it and fix it up, I just couldn't get it to get back to normal. It hasn't been that much of an issue for me at this point, so I'm not really worried about it because I never use the end button ever at all. We are in 2024, and the question becomes, should you buy an MPC 5000? And to be honest with you, it depends. If you're a fan of the older machines like the 4000 and the 3000 and their behaviors, no, I would not recommend buying a MPC 5000. If you're a fan of the new software, the MPC 2 software, should you buy an MPC 5000? It depends. The 5000 comes feature packed with a bunch of stuff that's compatible with the MPC 2 software. So it becomes a interesting proposition of having an older machine that you can fiddle around with and know with confidence you can transfer the entire thing over to the MPC 2 software and then move forward, or vice versa. The only thing that's not transferable is the software instruments. So all the soft synth instruments, the piano, the strings, the loads and loads of synths, you can't transfer those things. You're gonna have to export those the analog way. And that's great. That's great because you can actually add those effects to it and dump it out into your DAW. That's great. But transferring it to the MPC 2, it's not gonna do that. So, sorry, I keep looking off. There's a fly in here that just keeps annoying the crap out of me. But suffice to say, I would recommend the 5000 to somebody who's an MPC gearhead who is going to sit down and tinker. And I like to tinker. I would say, yes, it's a good buy for somebody who's willing to do those things and accept that the machine has its flaws and you're willing to work around it and figure out a way to make it function for you, which is what I did. I found a way to make it work for me. Would I recommend it to the layman? No, I don't think so. I don't think it's one of those things you could just jump into and expect it to be amazing. Because again, like with mine I got used from someone else, and not only did they spill an insane amount of food on this machine and inside this machine somehow, but also it wasn't well taken care of as I thought. And I had to open it up, I had to fix a bunch of things, and then the operating system was messed with like terribly. Things were saved in all the wrong places. And I think he or she accidentally deleted the synth folder. So again, the synth did not behave right. When I first got it, I was so frustrated with the synth. I totally get why everyone who uses the synth hates the synth. Not because it's bad, but because you need to load it. It's not preloaded, so you can just access it. If you didn't know that you had to reinstall the operating system to get it to function, you would be massively frustrated with it. So it makes sense why everyone hates it. But once you actually start fiddling with it and you've reinstalled the operating system, then all of a sudden that problem goes away and it's not an issue. And I haven't experienced any of the crazy issues. There's one issue that one gentleman brought up about the MIDI scroll on the machine. when you input data from an external source, and it allows you to select all of the MIDI files. Like, I actually tried this, and he's right. It doesn't actually allow you to copy it. Like, it says copy, but then you can't paste it. It's weird. I don't even use that section. To be honest with you, it's such a minor thing to have an issue with, because in my mind, as an MPC user, why would you do that? Why wouldn't you just replay it? Because the amount of time you're going to spend trying to copy this and move it to somewhere else in the sequence, you could have just replayed it. And even if it took me 5 times to replay it, I will still replay it faster than it will take me to figure out how to copy paste. Does that make sense? Like, I think that makes sense. So I don't have an issue with this. I was never a 4000 guy, so this to me makes sense. So does it make sense in 2025? I think so. I think it just depends on the person. It makes as much sense as buying an ASR 10 in 2024, 25, to be honest with you. To be fair, like, if you want the experience and you want something that has a ton of features and you're not a super geeky guy, meaning, you know, you're not going to go do a ton of menu diving, because that's the one thing with the 4000 I wasn't a fan of. It's got so many features that I got lost in it. And the more I have to get lost in something, the less I'm producing, and that's a problem. So, you know, I'm not that guy. The guys that are like that, I love watching their work. Like, I love watching everybody who's made the 4000 an amazing machine. But again, I don't consider this the successor to the 4000. I consider this the flagship for the 500, 1000, 2500, and it's going in that direction. It's the next generation. It's not replacing the 4000. So that's my 2 cents on that. And I hope you guys enjoyed this. Just a little bit deeper dive. Everybody else has done like a ton of things with it, with the sampler side of it. I figured, let me just show you a little bit more of what's really going on with the machine. And, you know, I think this is going to be helpful to somebody. Again, I'll catch you next time. Like, share, subscribe, and I'll see you later.